Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. This is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And we also talk about sustainable design as well. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and it struck me recently that I have never talked about safety in buildings. I've not made time to talk about safety of building occupants. So this is my first foray into that world, and I have a wonderful guest with a really cool story too. Her name is Sam Mathews. Sam, welcome to the show. It's an absolute joy to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here, and I'm so glad you're bringing this topic to the front of Better Buildings for Humans, because safety is the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it gets skipped a lot in buildings. So thank you.
Well, I think this is episode, 100 or pretty close to episode 100 right now. And we haven't covered safety yet, so clearly it gets missed. Let's start by getting to know you a little better. Tell us about your background and the path, which I know because it's a really interesting story. Tell us about the path that led you to the founding of your company, Loci.
Yeah, well, my background is in sound and audio engineering. I was a DJ and performer and producer for years, and I got really into live streaming my shows and kind of fell into a GoPro hacking community and figured out a way to do these neat multi-camera broadcasts of my shows. And around the same time, my bandmate's brother had just got the Oculus, the sort of first consumer VR headset, through Kickstarter. And I connected with some of the GoPro hackers and decided it would be cool to make a 360 music video. And the place that I was filming this 360 music video in just so happened that there was another guy who had recently 3D scanned the same building to make a virtual art gallery because he had just got the Oculus. And it's a small world. And I was very taken with his 3D scan, and he was very taken with my 360 video, and he wanted my 360 video for his art project, and I wanted his scan for my video. And so we shared the files, and he came back to me a couple weeks later and showed me something that really blew my mind, which was I thought he would be combining this into some sort of game engine. And what he showed me was just a browser that as soon as we went to the website, we were inside my music video, but we had presence, and there was no app, there was no download. It was just a web link. And it turns out he had sort of joined this group out of the University of Toronto, this project out of the University of Toronto called Janus VR. And they had just been accepted to Y Combinator, which is a very prestigious Silicon Valley accelerator. And so then I joined their team to work on business development and think about all the commercial applications of this tool. They leaned towards like the crypto gaming metaverse side, and I was never much of a gamer, and I was leaning into the sort of physical event side, being that I played a lot of festivals. And I found that the best commercial use case for this technology was helping people plan physical events, be it film locations or festivals. I was able to save some larger festivals a couple $100,000 in planning just by bringing in their stage designers into our 3D sites on a Google Earth tile and allowing them to really figure out how they were going to build. So this is, something called progressive design build for the architects out there, but we were doing it lightweight on the browser. During this time, we kind of split, these guys wanted to keep working on the gaming side of it. I wanted to work on the sort of physical application side of it. And around this time, the Vegas shooting happened. My friend survived. And as I was just going through their recounting of it and started seeing all of the footage and the investigation, it became really obvious that no one's ever really shown what to do, or especially in these places, we're sending everyone to a festival to get drunk and they don't even know where the exits are. And you could see this happening. I think the New York Times did a really good breakdown of that tragedy, where you could see people running across the line of fire to go out the way they came in, the availability heuristic in action. And I thought, well, here I am helping people plan. I have this whole digital twin of a festival, not of that one, but of a festival. And I realized I could probably make something like a CAPTCHA in which people would see a visualization of the exits and then have to tap where they are on the map rather than, training Google on what traffic lights look like. And so I took this concept to the chairman of C-SPAN, which is a large ship manufacturer in Canada that I knew the family of. And he was quite taken with the idea as well and gave me a building to do a pilot on in their shipyard, which is probably what you saw on my website, Exit Test. And my thesis was there's all this 3D data available. Surely if I track it down and pull it all together, I'll be able to create a lightweight, cost efficient digital twin for an enterprise. And so I was using Matterport for the inside of the buildings, Google CCM for the outside, pulling it all into Unreal Engine. And then taking what a lot of new neuroscience that had been discovered about how the brain conceptualizes space and navigates through space, and trying to create a modern version of a map. So something that exaggerates landmarks in the environment and sort of degrades or sort of dulls things that are irrelevant. And then hyper focused on how a camera path moves through that 3D space to maintain as many sight lines with landmarks and the horizon as possible. So writing a specific camera program that travels through digital twins to create resilient path memories. I didn't think it was scalable. I still don't think it's scalable to put everybody into a VR headset, but I also don't think that a flat 2D map is effective. So this was my in-between place that felt scalable, where it's like, if we have a good digital twin, we can shoot content specific to occupant paths or occupant needs and store those almost like as an API in the building, that this would be a much more efficient way to teach people about the space. And so that was kind of what led me into creating Loci. But unfortunately, as I was doing this, like in reality, hunting down these files, it became really clear that the 3D data isn't there yet. We have had progressive design build for over 20 years, which is an amazing program. I think you're probably familiar with progressive design build. It's an insurance program that says the architect, the developer, and the owner all have to agree on how the building is going to be built. Up to 80% of it's built before they'll underwrite it. And this is to make sure everybody's on the same page and there's no blame game as to, well, who chose that material? Well, we had to switch it out kind of thing. So we've had progressive design build for a long time, but it doesn't actually take us to the end result of as built. And it doesn't bring us to an owner occupant having those files. When bigger companies who saw what I was doing with C-SPAN, like we're talking Fortune 10 manufacturers, wanted the same thing, and we went out to start to look for their files. It was bringing me back to my DJ days, because somebody's named this like stairwell final 4, use this one is the file name, right? And so we're in this situation where the owner isn't aware that the value of these files, and so they don't get them in the handoff, right? So the end occupant just has some floor plans, maybe. They don't have these files that are actually worth millions of dollars. Like, just to give an example, the average high rise, 10 to 20% of the total construction cost actually went to design files. So we're talking millions of dollars worth of assets that are not tracked by owners. And so rather than educate people on how to build better RFPs and get bids that actually bring these files in-house, which was like a huge lift, I had to abandon 6 years of development and research just like a year and a half ago. And it's not that the research is fully abandoned. It's now going to live in a university, but I had to go back to the drawing board from a commercial standpoint and walk away from Exit Test as a digital twin product. And actually ended up going back to these customers saying, what if I did this? And it was this very early project I had made, which was a QR code scavenger hunt. Same concept. You want a building to teach you about itself rather than use these digital files. What if we stickered the fixtures and the routes and sent people on these little scavenger hunts to discover them? So I went from very fancy digital twins to selling stickers.
All right. Well, let's come back on that for just a second. First of all, for our sort of maybe less tech savvy audience, can you define digital twins for us so that we understand?
Yeah,
Or
digital
maybe it's just me because I'm old, but let's.
Oh, no, I mean, it's a broad term. When I talk about digital twins, I'm talking about a replication of the physical asset, but it could be of a process, right? Like it could be
Okay.
tracking the temperature, it could be referring to sensors. It's a very broad umbrella.
Okay.
My focus was on how to create a digital replica of the physical environment.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's that. So exit test is no longer part of Loci. So what is Loci now, and how is it helping people to escape as necessary?
Yes, Loci sort of evolved from this idea of, a modern visual map into these QR code scavenger hunts because it actually helps people to. My customers still had the same problem that Exit Test was aiming to solve, which is in a large scale manufacturing plant where you're onboarding, 50 to 200 new people a week. It's unrealistic to get your line manager to walk every new hire to their assembly point, right? We would love to. The ideal would be to give everyone a physical orientation to the building. But the reality is it's usually like a 90-page PowerPoint that's like rapid fire. And we don't learn that way. 90% of what you learn in a classroom is gone within a week. And so everybody just knows that this is a compliance exercise, and it leads to alarmingly low morale. Like people know that they're just there to tick a box. The safety leader knows that they're just there to tick a box. But the effects of that are, say you have, a new worker go to the smoke break area instead of the assembly point, and you have to chase them down on a golf cart and make them go to the assembly point. Now your time to all clear is up by 2 minutes, and 2 minutes, say at the Tesla Fremont factory, is well over $1 million in lost revenue. So this cost is huge just for running a sloppy drill. And so there's lots of ways, like, it's something like an AED. If you can't get to an AED within 3 minutes, there's very little chance that person's going to survive. And so there's things about our physical environment that we absolutely need to be familiar with. An emergency is not the right time to become familiar. And so rather than having somebody walk every new person around, it's actually better for them to discover what's around. So all Loci does is prompt you with different emergency scenarios that could happen in your workplace. You get assigned it through your learning management system. You can imagine it's your first day or first week of work. You get into your office. It's like, say you've got to do a drill. You have to do it from your mobile device. Okay, scan the drill from your screen. It says, okay, go find your start marker. This grounds you in where you are. So it'll be right by the evacuation map. As soon as you scan that, you'll be assigned some sort of random scenario. It says your colleague's having a heart attack. 911's been called. Someone's giving compressions. Find the AED. And so then right from there, you're put into a scenario. So your brain is in that context, and now you walk. And when you're physically walking, you're creating the strongest memory you could possibly create, especially when you're holding the context of that emergency in your mind.
Oh my God, where do I invest? Let's talk about, I got to tell you a quick story because the other day I read something that basically, it was talking about emergency situations. And it said that most of us believe that in an emergency, we're going to rise to the occasion. We're going to find something special inside of us that allows us to deal with the emergency. Well, in fact, what happens in an emergency is we only rise to the level of our training.
Exactly.
Right. So if we've got training and experience, we'll rise to that level. If we don't, there's no magic that's going to happen if you haven't drilled and had, some sort of background before. So that little learning aligns very well with your work. I want to talk about your website a little bit because there was 6 components or 6 aspects of the Loci method, and I want to go through them. I found them all interesting, and I thought, let's talk about them. The first one was neuroscience. How does you sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but how does neuroscience play in?
Well, neuroscience is like my passion. How brains conceptualize space, it is fascinating. How we remember is fascinating. Early on in this journey, I read a great book called Moonwalking with Einstein, and I highly recommend it for everyone. And it's about a journalist who is sort of living in his parents' basement and goes to cover a memory championship in his city, and was sort of fascinated that everyone he talked to said anyone could do it. So he set out to sort of test that theory. And spoiler alert, he ends up like setting records and sort of proving that this technique is just something anyone can practice. And that's where our namesake comes from, is the method of loci, the method of place. It's an ancient memorization technique, like more than 2,000 years old. Cicero kind of formalized it, but there's lots of lore around how it started. And we only realized in the last, I guess, decade why it works. The Nobel Prize was awarded in 2014 to Edward and Maybrit Moser, as well as John O'Keefe, for discovering place and grid cells. So place cells fire when something interrupts your horizon, like a landmark interrupts your horizon. And grid cells fire when we're traversing terrain or walking or driving between areas. And so together, you'll have grid cells that connect place cells. So you can really think about them like a place cell is a landmark, a grid cell is a route. And so I became fascinated with how do we make these cells fire? And the reality is, walking the route is the best way to make them fire. But, even when we were working on it from a 3D visualization perspective, that was my same goal, was how do I exaggerate a landmark to make it fire? So walking the route and physically, even you've probably experienced this when you forget something and then you walk back to where you came and you remember it. That's this neuroscience in action, and that's really the foundation of this product.
I love it. Okay, now localization. Let's talk about that.
So we've probably been to worked somewhere where you had to do sexual harassment training or these canned courses online, your cybersecurity training. But all local risk tends to have to be put together by some local safety or facility manager. Localization for training is a huge challenge, and it's a really underserved area in most facilities and enterprises and campuses. And so I wanted to make it easy to make that local training happen, as opposed to taking a screenshot of like a Google map or like a picture of a place, which just isn't going to work. I wanted to make it easy for somebody to just tell me about their place. Like, okay, how many floors are in this building? How many safety fixtures are on each floor? Here's your drills and your sticker. Go put them up. And now all of your training is localized.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Third one, accessibility.
Yeah, so this is a huge one for me. A lot of, I think it's like 1 in 4 safety incidents are related to language barriers. And we have a colonial obsession with writing out numbers and italicizing things. And we also have really become app obsessed, but I'm all in on the web forever. I think the web is the most amazing tool of our time. And especially when it comes to designing something that's accessible to everyone. Our app is purely web-based. All of the buttons are text-based. So if whoever is using our drills or whoever is going through our drills on their device, it will automatically translate into their browser's native language settings. So you're ensuring that, especially for the stuff that's critical life-saving information, they've learned it in their language of origin. The other side of that is just trying to, what I call internally, hit zero, which is a term I stole from my niece's cheer competitions, where you make 0 mistakes. It's called hit zero, but I say hit zero is hit zero cognitive load. So an example being, if I'm in a country and I'm looking for the way out and I see the word stairs written out and I don't know that language, I don't know what it is. But if I see a symbol for stairs, I know what it is.
Right.
So cognitively, I will hit zero if I don't have to think about it. I really think it's important that in design, especially in building design, especially in information design and signage, that we should be hitting zero cognitively. Somebody shouldn't have to engage their prefrontal cortex to figure out where they are.
Right on. I have to commend you. This is the first competitive cheerleading reference in approximately 100 episodes. So go, Sam. The next one I think is self-explanatory, but let's hear it anyway. Virtualization.
Yeah, just basically turning all of this into something that is web-based, making sure that this system can handle itself.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. Automation.
This is a big one, actually. These drills are published as SCORM files. So this is a big one because these drills are published as SCORM files, which are the files used by learning management systems. In every enterprise I've gone into, the safety department is usually the least mature part of the organization. HR and safety kind of comes once an organization hits a certain size. And that means that they're usually very under supported with enterprise tools. Learning management systems are very expensive. They're very robust and they should be used by everyone. But you go into a safety department and they're usually making their own training. They're making it as PowerPoints. They're trying to hunt people down and make sure they look at them. So I wanted to make these drills something that really can take an entire task off of a safety leader's plate. And so publishing these drills as SCORM files is a way for them to call in these other departments and have them automate these drills so that nobody's falling through the cracks. Because no matter how hard you try, there's going to be people who miss that onboarding.
Right. Well, I think that leads to the last one, which is verification.
Yeah.
I assume it's what it sounds like, but let's make sure we explore it.
Nobody falls through the cracks, right? If you're creating a system in which as soon as somebody gets their user ID, they're served a drill, there's no way that they can be missed. And so my goal is for everybody to have a completely trained workforce. So even if they've missed the PowerPoint, they've at least touched the safety fixtures, they've at least walked their critical routes.
Right. Perfect. Okay, just quick review on them: neuroscience, localization, accessibility, virtualization, automation, and verification. That was a nice little journey. I want to talk about applications for Loci that might go beyond good old-fashioned fire evacuations. Are there any other applications that you think that it'll be useful for?
Oh my gosh, so many. Yeah, and this is where I really call upon your audience to reach out if you have ideas. This has been the most satisfying part of bringing this to market is creating new drills. Like 2 weeks ago, I was just on a barge in the middle of nowhere making a person overboard drill. And it's fun. Like, it's just fun to think through because what happens is, like, once somebody understands that this is a way to move anyone through a physical environment in the context they need to understand it, they have these amazing ideas for drills. So we've done, person overboard drills, emergency stop buttons, bleed kits. We're just starting to make them for fire wardens so that they can actually not just, you have your basic evacuation, but now you need to go check all the fire doors. So really any situation where there's a physical location and a sequence in which somebody should understand something, you can make a drill. I just added a feature where there's a multiple choice question you can add to a fixture. So you could say, like, hey, will this extinguisher put out a grease fire? Or like, how many blasts on an air horn for a person overboard? And so you're not like sending them to just go do a little test on the screen. You're asking them a quick question at each spot so you make sure they understand why. And now I want to take this into equipment as well. So I've created a sort of new subcategory for our drills that'll be equipment based. So you can imagine, say you're, renting an excavator or you're even renting a car. And in order for you to get off the lot, you scan a little start marker. It's like, show me where the spare tire is, show me where this gauge is, that kind of thing. And you just have to go find it and answer a question. This is the best way. Especially think about a Tesla. Like, most people don't know that, like, the emergency release for the doors in a Tesla is actually behind the driver vent. So You're lending your Tesla to somebody. Maybe you make them go through a little orientation as to like where these critical safety features are, or just like that you need to know where these things are for proper use. So really, I think that there will be thousands of drills that end up being made. Right now, I think we've got 30 different drills we've made, but I don't see that slowing down anytime soon.
What about an active shooter?
Yeah, I think anywhere that there's, I mean, we never want to replace any training. Or, in fact, I would say that most training isn't training, it's instruction that's lacking training. What I want to do is be the practical application of that instruction. So, you've gone through your active shooter protocols. Now go find the rooms that are safest to you and scan those. Go find the doors that need to be shut that are bulletproof. It's never going to be like, hey, you can do a loci drill and not do really anything else other than maybe evacuations and things like that. It's always going to be, how do you turn this information into action?
Right. All right. I'm going to turn this around a little bit. I want to go back to the design of the building itself. Tell us what architects could do to design spaces that are more intuitive, when it comes to a need to move somewhere quickly or, find the AED, as the example you used earlier. How can the architects make that an easier, faster, more effective, efficient process?
I'm so glad you're asking this question because it's a huge issue where fire life safety engineering, life safety in general is such an afterthought in design. You see it everywhere you go. You're like in this magnificent building and then there's like a Microsoft Word paper sign, and you're like, what happened here? Do you not care what this looks like? And it almost seems like a lot of times you go somewhere and it feels like the architect was in a fight with the fire safety engineer or the safety engineer, and you like can physically see the fight all around you. And so I wish that it was just right up front a part of the design process. I think that there's a lot that is subtle and not that hard to do that can be done. I believe one of your other guests, James Garrett Jr., was it? He was talking about a project, the Great River Landing Project, where they brought in the actual future occupants and elevated them to the same level as the paying client, right? And I can't tell you how much this touched me to hear him talk about that on your podcast, because it's so rare. And it shouldn't be. You think about somebody like a janitor and just a simple conversation with a janitor, like, how is this bathroom design? All the time I will see like hand pump soaps on the counter that are out of service, and then there's like a big soap dispenser stuck to the mirror, and you're like, people are pumping all the things trying to figure out where the soap
One right here.
and,
Right here, there's one.
right here. And it's like, here's the thing. There's a unionized worker who doesn't want to get on their hands and knees and crawl under a sink to replace the soap dispensers. And all it takes is 2 or 3 unionized workers saying, my knees, no, I won't. And then you have these things. So as an architect, as a designer, that's on you. It really is on you. If you can't walk into a building 10 years later and see all of your mistakes and errors and learn from that, like, I don't think you should be an architect, because it's arrogant. And so I think like there's just the practicality in the design side, thinking of those people, bringing them into the room sooner. But then there's just like from a cognitive side, we can either help people remember more or make a place less memorable. And I understand, with unit economics, we want everything to be the same for cost efficiency, but it comes down to even choosing different colors, slightly different designs for each floor. Maybe all the odd floors have a certain feature, all the even floors have a certain feature. The method of loci is an ancient memorization technique that actually dictated the design of buildings, right? We'd have these long hallways with art and pieces like that. So you could remember a sonnet for your sweetie or give a big long address to your constituents, because theaters were designed this way for actors to be able to memorize their lines by moving through the theater in a sort of specific way. So I think we can bring that back into design. There's an amazing study, the London Cabbie study. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so Eleanor McGuire, she actually just passed last year. She's one of my heroes. She did this amazing study on London cab drivers. London cab drivers have to memorize what's called the knowledge, and bless the Brits and their tradition. So cab drivers don't use GPS there, the blacktop cabbies. They have to memorize all 25,000 streets of London. and they're tested on how they'll get through it at different times of days and if something's blocked. Now, they studied their brains and they still study their brains. They're probably the most studied brains in the world. And then she was able to show that in their hippocampus, the posterior hippocampus, they actually had up to 20% more gray matter than regular folks. That memorizing physical space grows gray matter in your brain. It's one of the best. So it's some of the strongest proof we have for neuroplasticity. And so if you think about that applied to building design, something like adding features to every area that is within a sight line. So if you move into an area that's behind another wall, what is the feature of this area that will anchor you here? Can you make sure that there's a place cell firing in every area within a certain view within a building? Because if you can do that, you've created a mental anchor for that place. The more mental anchors you can create in a building, the more physical landmass that person's brain is remembering. So if you want your building to be remembered, you have to think about how the brain remembers space. And I think that there's a lot that can be done that isn't that difficult. Maybe it comes down less from the architect and more into the designer. You think of a hotel, gosh, like think of a hotel in Vegas and it's just like straight out of The Shining, these like hallways that go on forever. But pieces of art, themes of art, all the art on this floor is ocean based. All of the art on this floor is floral based. Like our brains need just one little distinct piece of novelty in order to break up and organize space. And if we can give people that in our designs, they'll remember your building more. They'll feel more intuitive in how they move around. And if they're able to anchor where they are in the building, they're far more likely to be able to get out of the building.
Right. All right. I'm going way. That was brilliant. It's interesting. So the architects are going to have to make it beautiful, on brand, and memorable simultaneously. And that's doable. I'm pretty sure that's doable. But they balance a lot of things that I find astounding. So I think that's doable. I want to go way off script for a second here, because what you were saying there just got me interested in, urban planning, a neighborhood. The concepts that you just spoke about, can you imagine them being used in the planning and management of a neighborhood as well?
Exactly. Like green spaces, sculptures, just even street names, right? Anything that can kind of create mnemonic value in your brain will help you create a map. And the more you create a map, the more connected you feel to that space, the more empowered you feel to move through that space, to talk to people about that space. The more connected and empowered you feel in that space, the more likely you are to act in that space and create in that space. To me, the downfall that we're living through right now is in trying to do these mass, like over planned places where there's 4 different colors you can paint a house. And it's like, how many people have literally been charged with breaking into someone's house because they thought they thought they were going home? Like, you hear about this all of the time, and it's disturbing to no end, because it's like, if you can't even tell where you live, right? Like, what's happening to your brain? It's going to be mush, right? This is such a great point. Like, designing communities really should be designed around whatever the like landmark gathering place is in that community. We should definitely create enough differentiation in color palettes that give people a sense of expression that they can connect to.
Have you spent much time in Toronto and around Toronto?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So a long time ago, there used to be a really good CBC show, like a skit comedy thing called The Minivan People. And it was the story of these 2 young yuppies living in, I don't know if it was Vaughan or Brampton or, one of the 905 suburbs. And in one particular episode, they get lost in their subdivision, right? And you've probably been to some of them where they use curves because, they don't want it to be a grid, lots of curves. And my God, it's the easiest thing in the world is to get lost in one of those, Vaughan, Brampton, Mississauga, Etobicoke subdivisions. You could be trapped there for hours.
Awful. It's dystopian to me, but I mean, yeah.
Without the GPS, you're done for.
Yeah.
You're done
And
for.
I mean, and that's the thing, like GPS is another thing that is almost, it has quite pernicious effects. Like, we're almost doing our own version of digital redlining, right? Like, it's almost like we're creating efficiency redlining where whole communities are getting forgotten about because,
Right.
and I actually really appreciate what Apple Maps has been doing lately. I think it's like the most like sleeper hit product of Apple's is Apple Maps, where they've just introduced a new feature, like I think it's called routes, where you
Yes.
can, say, okay, I want to stop at these places, or like I want to go by my friend's house and I want to save these routes as opposed to like locations. Because, we see so many neighborhoods kind of becoming little ghost towns. And it's like, well, how is a young person who's just graduating high school going to know that something's for lease and maybe they could open their own little pizza shop if they're never going there, right? We're not
Right.
actually interacting with these communities. So, yeah, I hope that the GPS changes a little bit. I don't know if we have any hope of changing the minds of developers and their bottom lines, but I do think that we can start, playing around with our navigational tools and helping those bring more of our values to life about how we feel about our communities, the things we care about, even just like taking us on a route that goes by our favorite park or something, just grounding you
Yeah.
in the things you care about.
And there's such a clear path to monetization there,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really is a good idea. I hope somebody should be listening out there. I'll
Yeah.
run,
I mean, and
run with
honestly, if
this
you
one.
haven't tried Apple Maps, if you've been a Google Map user forever, like I'm not a shill for Apple at all, but
Yeah.
I do think that there's lots of other fun GPS tools out there. I hope we see more of that for sure.
Introducing Solera Reserve from Advanced Glazings, making luxury homes even more beautiful and more healthy using cool, controlled natural light. Right on. All right, we're coming to the end. First of all, did I miss anything that you really wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. This has been such a fun conversation. No, I
Okay,
think this
good.
is great.
I didn't want to, leave anything out. So there's a question I ask Sam every single episode, and I ask the guests to answer from whatever perspective that they'd like. And the question is, what makes a great building?
I love this question and I love all the answers people give. I think what makes a great building for me is a place that just sort of gets into your bones right away, like a place that feels understandable. And that I think that comes from all of it feeling cohesive. I think in most buildings you walk into, you can see the silos in the design build process, like visibly. And when you go into a place where the safety signage is all integrated, like the lighting's nice, and it just puts your nervous system at ease. I think too often we see people hyper focused on these trends of like wellness and things like that without actually, like you say, like safety is kind of seen as this dorky or like this thing that's like, oh, we have to do it, and not as something that is at its base level respecting human life. And I think that if you walk into a building that feels like it respects human life, it just feels different. It does, the safety features don't feel like an afterthought. The lighting design feels like it's catering to your well-being, and not just in a, we want you to like feel like you're in a meditation room, but in the sense that it's like, we respect your autonomy and your cognitive load. So I think buildings that do that usually have brought in all different stakeholders early on, and that really shows up in the end result.
Ah, fantastic. Great answer. All right. Before we go, do you have anything exciting, any big announcements that you'd like to share, or anything particular that you'd like to promote, Sam?
Yeah, I'd love people to go try some drills from my website. I have,
Say the URL for us.
yeah, so it's Learn by Loci, that's LOCI.com, and it's or loci.ca. They'll both go to the same website. And on there, you can pick a drill that you want to try. I'll email you the drill. You can cut it out, paste it up, and send your kiddos or whoever you want out to find the assembly point. And I'm really curious and keen on what all the other use cases are. So yeah, I would just love to send people to my website to try a drill. And I'd love to hear from them on what they wish they would be a drill, could be a drill in their environment.
Fantastic. Sam, thank you so much. What an extraordinary episode. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I just really appreciate that you care so much about humans and making better buildings for them. It's a great podcast and a pleasure to be a part of.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.